Bigfoot. This is the mountains right above the beach in Santa Cruz.
This is possibly a surfing Bigfoot.
Yeah, and I'd like to, it would be great to get a Bigfoot. It would be great to start tracking these Bigfoot, put collars around them.
It would be nice to capture one right down on the beach.
Yeah, now this area, prior to all this civilization coming into the area, this was a really wild area, and they had Native Americans here that were that communed with nature a lot more than people do now. I mean, people go out with excursions. They go out and they hike. I think
there's some argument on that. A lot of people find themselves, most at peace in nature.
Yeah, but it's kind of like a weekend thing or whatever, and they go back to their.
We have a job to do. We got to go back to the city.
That's what I'm saying. It's not a permanent situation. It's not that wild. It's kind of like taking off a little bit of time from your work and then just going to the woods for a second. It's a whole different story living that day in, day out without any parachute.
Well, they're trying to just gain some peace in their life. That's all.
Who's that? Oh, yeah. But then it reminds me of the Native Americans. Now, Native Americans are very tied in with Bigfoot. I mean, just in their culture and their totems and some of the rock art and things like that. And they also would do like drugs like peyote and stuff like that. Not necessarily recreational like a lot of people do now, but more
for religious sense.
Right, but we're talking about how people nowadays are finding, and it's not something we're recommending by any stretch, but we're just talking about.
Well, I mean, recently, medicinal marijuana now for recreational use in 2 states, and it's just moving ahead.
Yeah,
look at all the prescription medications that are made for people, to help them with different problems.
Right. It's just a fact of life. Now, this natural type of stuff is also getting into the news more, or mainstreaming, so to speak. But the Indians would go on these, I guess, peyote trips and just have experiences or whatever, that mescaline or whatever the different drugs are, depending, I guess, the part of the United States or part of North America or the Americas. They'd have different medicines, so to speak. You were saying that they were
well, these the terminal cancer patients are taking LSD, and they're being guided through their trip, through their LSD experience, by psychotherapists, and doctors are helping them through this. They're giving them the correct doses. I don't recommend you try this on your own, but under a doctor's care, that's a different thing. And so people are having visions and seeing their, even one guy talked about. He saw his dead father, and he approved of it.
His dead father approved of what?
Of taking these drugs.
Yeah, but I guess the main thing about this is there was as far as it relates to Bigfoot is, the Native Americans were tied into nature, were tied into visions, were tied into Bigfoot. Yeah, I think almost kind of thinking away the whole hippie movement was kind of like getting back to
nature.
Back to nature. It was long hair, bandana, kind of like dressing in Indian, clothes, like leather, not, what is it called, the deerskin jackets and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I mean, that whole thing, if you ever seen Oliver Stone's movie, what was it? I think it was a Jim Morrison movie.
But that really was just a moment in time. That wasn't a long period.
No,
of time.
Yeah, it was a blip. Yeah, it was very short. I mean, people think of the hippies being when was that roughly? The late '60s and early '70s, and it was over.
And it was over, right?
Yeah, but it was kind of like getting back to nature type of thing,
being in
kind of a backlash.
Being in harmony with nature, I think, was the point.
But it's hard mixing the two, mixing civilization, because it was all of a sudden this industrial growth. I mean, the Industrial Revolution hadn't taken place.
We talked a little bit.
Let me just say, because I sound like I was going to say the Industrial Revolution hadn't started that much earlier. I mean, I said it hadn't taken place. The Industrial Revolution hadn't started that much earlier, and people were all of a sudden getting out of agrarian situations more in cities with smokestacks and everything like that.
Well, I mean, think of the Clash. I mean, that's not harmonic. That's not the vibrations your body feels. That's not in tune with a peaceful life. Would you agree?
I'd agree, and I think Bigfoot figures into all this type of stuff.
Well, and then the fact that people are stimulated by Bigfoot and interested in Bigfoot, it means they're just trying to get back to nature. They're trying to get back to a more peaceful time.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let's talk about that more.